Welcome back. You are listening to episode 40 of the Cream City Club podcast. I am Gunnar Amalunk, here by myself to start out the episode today. Spencer Michaelis will be joining us later on in the episode, but I'll explain all of that and why that's the case later on. But first, a reminder, if you're listening and haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you're listening on and rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And today is going to be another Bucks episode. Obviously, as I mentioned, Spencer's not going to be with us here for part one of this episode. It's going to be one whole episode, but we're going to split it up into game one and game two. So I'll be here talking about game one, and then Spencer will join us for game two in the back half of this episode, maybe in 15, 20 minutes. But, Spencer's a busy guy, coaching baseball, doing other podcasts. So I thought it would maybe be best if I was able to sort of capture the moment and the feeling of game one after a big win that the Bucks were able to get instead of having to backtrack depending on what happens in game two. You never know if it ends up going bad. We don't want the bad vibes to really present because we want to give this first game here some due diligence. But I was able to attend game one on Sunday night, and I think that's why I can feel pretty confident in talking about that game. First, I want to bring up that crowd energy that the arena had in Pfizer. I don't know how many of you guys were able to attend. I assume a lot of you if you're listening to this, but who knows? Maybe you're newer Bucks fans, but I don't know how many of you guys were able to attend Bucks games in the Bradley Center, and experience that type of crowd. I'm not sure if that was in part of the crowd, if that was in part of the building of how it was structured. Um, but that energy in that building all the time. I mean, I know we didn't have the greatest of teams, but when we did make the playoffs, that place was rocking. You couldn't hear the person next to you. It was that loud. And I really felt like in this game, obviously we're winning and we're off to a great start, but Dame even mentioned it in his post-game interview where before the game, that place was rocking. And that's what we need to bring all playoffs along if we can do it. But obviously, let's talk about the actual game now. So I don't start rambling because I'm by myself. I might actually do that. Who knows? But let's talk about how we won the game. And first, we got to go into going into the game the night before. The question everybody was wondering and asking themselves is Giannis going to play? Is he going to play? We got a little bit of hope in a backwards way. You normally wouldn't be happy if someone's listed as doubtful for a game, but I know I was because it left a little bit of room of hope. Obviously, going in and finding out that he's not going to play those Sunday night hurt a little bit, but I think he's also listed as doubtful again for game two going into this. But I think going forward leaves us a lot of hope regarding his availability in the series. Could even play game two, who knows? But I think it's a lot better than just seeing a nice out going into the game. But obviously, we did see that when the game actually did arrive. But I think there's a chance now maybe we'll see him in game two, and I feel semi-confident he'll play when we go to Indiana, but I guess it also depends on how the series goes. Um, but that was on the Bucks side of the ball. He was the only guy that was injured in this one for the Bucks. But on the Pacers side, they were without Ben Mathurin, which is a big rotation player for them. So um, now I think we can actually jump into the game. First half, I talked about last episode with Spencer how important game one's going to be and how important it's going to be to jump out and throw the first punch. And because you really need this win. I think more than any other year, game one feels very important this year, and we went over all the scenarios. Sort of even alluded to it with Giannis's injury looming and stuff like that. But think about having to be down 0-1. You're just trying to salvage, making it 1-1 going into Indiana with a couple days rest. And Giannis still in limbo. I mean, that's if I'm a Pacers fan, I'd be pretty happy if that's the case. So we still got some work to do going forward, but getting this win I think was very helpful in that. At least now you're ahead of that, and you can make this series 2-0 and really take advantage of it. So um, first, I got to mention Damian Lillard. I got to have a little bit of a section here where I talk a lot about him. Um, he was absolutely incredible. I was trying to come up with players and situations. I'm not going to bore you guys with all the amazing performances I've seen, but as far as on that stage, um, not missing a shot. We saw him talking a little bit to the Pacers bench after a couple of those plays. Um, you see the difference between an all-star and a star with a guy like that. The way he rises to the occasion, he's not scared of the moment. Um, you think about last season, what the Bucks were missing. That type of player is what they were missing. A guy who's going to create his own shot and be scared of absolutely nobody or no moment whatsoever. And he came and arrived at the biggest time. The Bucks needed it all season long. They needed it in game one in the first half, and he brought it. Um, how he did that, however, was things that we've been talking about all year with Damon, wanted to see him being highly aggressive, but bouncing off those high screens or those horn sets, um, sprinting off ball when he's getting screens from Pat Bev, who's going to be huge all series long, all playoffs long, doing just that. I think he always knows where Damian Lillard needs to be on the floor, what kind of shots he likes to get into. I think guys like Pat Connaughton do that really well. I want to see Jay Crowder. I think he's a guy who can do that pretty well. Guys with higher IQs, um, doing things that are for the team like that, setting screens and knowing where Dame wants to go, I think is very important. But um, I think Dame just being hyper aggressive, as I mentioned, and him playing with force and playing through contact. Um, I obviously mentioned that stare down that he had at the bench that came after an and one, where I think he had 10 plus points at that point. He was just going crazy. Still pretty close to a tie game too, which is pretty nice to see him talking like that. And the game's not really even out of hand at that point. Um, but yeah, I was just so impressed with Damian Lillard. Exactly what we needed, exactly what the doctor ordered. No pun intended there for Doc Rivers, but um, just absolutely incredible. And I had to ask myself or wonder, um, was he saving it all year? That type of feeling. Because this type of movement is what we've been calling for all year long. I don't really care about the shots going in or not, but we all know how important it is for him just to be playing like that and what it means for the guys around him and what it creates for them. Now, add Giannis to that situation, that's going to be very, very scary for teams. I bet this raised a lot of eyebrows in the Eastern Conference watching this. Um, I guess to allude to it a little bit, if Giannis does come back, I want to see not so much Oh, yeah, I guess a little bit. I want to see Giannis playing off a Dame a little bit more. Um, because a guy who can make shots like that and really spread the floor, that's just going to open everything up for a guy like Giannis. And I think instead of maybe catering to Giannis's style of play, which can work, and I want to see it go both ways, but more times than not, I think I want to see Dame control a game like this. I think we put ourselves in a pretty good spot when we do that. Um, but let's fast forward a little bit, or at least during that run, it felt like it was a lot of all Dame. And granted, he's shooting a lot, he's making a lot of shots. But the couple times that we needed a couple guys to get going and make some shots, it just wasn't falling for them. And he just felt like, man, can just a couple role players, a couple guys step up for him? And it just feels like we're going to take this game away. And that's what we did. As soon as a couple guys made some shots, um, that's when you started to see the Bucks take off. I believe it started with not exactly, but for me, that run really started when Pat Connaughton hit that and 1 3. I believe he went to Bobby Portis at least 3 to 5 times. I know he made probably 3 baskets in a row or somewhere around there. Um, Doing all Bobby stuff, maybe a couple too many post ups, but look, he deserves so much credit. We need his offense, especially without Giannis. He's going to be huge, but me complaining about too many post ups or um, and not really great mismatches, he was making those shots and and succeeding. So I shouldn't be complaining that much. And like I said, we need him, and that's very evident throughout this game. Ain't going to be evident throughout this series, but um, I think one other thing that I noticed here in this first half was I don't remember what sub it was, but I noticed Malik came in for Bobby, which I actually liked a lot. It happened a couple times. I believe just in that first half, and the second half I was getting nervous, so I don't even remember. I wasn't paying attention that much to that type of stuff. But I like that switch going from Malik to Bobby because you're not losing too much, obviously, on defense. But having both of those guys out there would be pretty tough. But you're also getting Malik's offensive threat out there too, um, in a good way too. I like that. So I like that switch. We saw AJ Green early on, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. But only played 5 minutes, but being one of the first subs was a good sign. I want to see him out there. Um, and he deserves to be out there, honestly, in this rotation. And I think the lack of guys being able to create their own shots on this team and guys being sort of not scared to shoot. I think AJ is one of those guys. Granted, it's his second year, it's his first time on a big stage like this. We were talking about him in the second half. He wasn't scared to shoot, but we're gonna have to be a little bit more lenient with him, knowing that that's the case. And maybe shots won't fall right away, but we got to stick with him. I think he's going to be very important. But I love this first half. Um, first half was played with so much pace, and quick decisions, guys cutting, um, playing free, playing random, playing high IQ basketball. I think is why you saw this go the way that it did in the first half. And just saw so many good things. As we slide into the second half, though. Oh boy. I didn't mention it, but the Bucks were up by 30 at one point. Going into the half, I believe it was 27. Dame had 35 in the first half. Pacers only had 42. So if you put that into perspective, wow. Uh, you felt like this game was, and it didn't get out of hand, but as a fan, we know what we went through last playoffs. You're like, please do not make a big run. And they did. So that was unfortunate to see, but um, really, we can fast forward through the first 7 minutes of that first or second half. Nothing really going for the Bucks that well. I mean, Dame, we'll talk about him. 0 points in the second half, being face guarded, being double teamed. When you're up by 30, other guys do need to step up, and he wasn't as aggressive as he was obviously in the first half, but that opportunity wasn't there. But the opportunity opens up for other guys. And I mentioned not to talk about, or I wasn't going to talk about much of that first 6 minutes because if you go to the last maybe 5 minutes of that quarter, I believe we only scored 2 points in that part of the quarter. But um, the biggest key in that, you're just hoping somebody keeps the Pacers off. Like you don't want them to get too close and make a run here. And what it came down to for me was unfortunately AJ Green. Um, got the opportunity again in the second half, had three wide open threes that he could capitalize on, and he missed. And you needed one of those threes. Granted, the score didn't get down to under 12 at that point, but cutting the lead from 30 to 12 in I mean, it would have been around 10, 12 minutes. That's scary. I mean, guys can make it run now. 12 points to a Pacers team doesn't seem that crazy to me, but um, that's what you're left with going into the fourth quarter. But good old Chris Middleton. Uh, I came up with a new nickname for him watching that game on Sunday. Calling Chris. Um, always keeps me relaxed. Whenever you need a bucket, he's there to get you one. And like I said, this game got down to about what 12 points, like I said, and Chris came out in the fourth quarter, hit some deep twos, some classic Chris shots. Um, just never letting them break the seal. Bobby Portis was also a part of that. He had a big one in this one too. So, um, I mentioned that offense and how you had to keep up with them, but somebody else had to step up without Dame in the second half just to give us some breathing room and be able to relax. And those two guys were able to do it. And that was pretty much all she wrote, honestly, for the second half. Um, outside of, we got to mention one guy, um, Brooke Lopez, caught an absolute body, I believe, on Aaron Nesmith, um, out of nowhere, really. I mean, it was 3, 4 minutes left in the game, maybe, and you're sitting down, you're just happy, you're able to breathe because the Bucks are gonna win this one, and you're just finally relaxed. And then Brooke just comes out and annihilates somebody. Bench loved it. Everybody loved it. Obviously, the crowd. I mentioned the crowd. But that was pretty funny. And a good way to cap off a huge win there. But my notes, though, for a general of this game, I mean, lowest amount of points scored, I believe, from the Pacers all season long. Just to give some credit to our defense a little bit. Now, I will say about our defense, they had a lot of open looks, and I think some of those will probably fall in the future. I don't know what the shot, I know there's some type of stat where it's shot quality. I'm sure they were pretty high up in that. Like I said, I got a ton of good looks, but you're able to contain Tyrese. I felt like he was a little bit, I'll say he was scared to shoot a little bit. I mean, he was probably 4 of 7, 5 of 7. I don't know what he was from the floor. He didn't shoot much, but it seemed like he was very passive trying to set up his teammates. And this is also their first time in the playoffs is this their core, I guess you could say. So they're going to be nervous. They're not going to be maybe making shots that they should be making in the game one. But I think going into game two, you got to expect that to change a little bit more. So, um, but I thought the defense in general, though, outside of that, was fine. I mean, I think a couple stretches too, they had a few too many offensive boards that gave them a couple extra chances, but I think some of those were maybe a little bit of bad luck on our end. Um, they had some really bad misses where it was flying off the rim and you just not in great position. I know maybe we might have ran out a zone of some type. I don't think it was really exactly a zone, but when you're playing sort of a frantic defense, maybe not in the best positions all the time, but I wasn't too concerned with at all with the defense. Like, that's what I saw. You had to keep up with them. You had to keep up with pace. You got to be frantic. And guys like Pat Connaughton, I look at a guy like that too, who brought that in 2021. Um, you got to keep up with a team like that, and they were able to do that and be frantic and um, get in passing lanes, staying in front of guys. I know Chris Middleton, I mentioned him a little bit in this podcast offensively, but um, defensively, I thought he put himself in a lot of good positions. One of Chris's best attributes, I feel like, is being able to predict the guy's driving lane and predicting their next step and cutting off that driving lane. He's maybe lost a step or two. I maybe can get that takeoff without Spencer on the podcast, but he would get mad at me if I said that in front of him. But I think I noticed a little bit more on defense with Chris, but and a little bit on offense too. But I think he's able to hold his own still, and I was pretty impressed with him on that end. But I think to leave off on this game, it was really encouraging, obviously, to get off to a 30-point lead. But in a way, I almost feel more calm with that second half, knowing that we had this huge lead, crumbled a little bit. We didn't get 1 point out of Damian Lillard, and we're still able to hold on. And I think that's going to raise a lot of confidence with this team. Like I said, in a weird way, you think that would actually make me feel pretty bad. But knowing that you face some adversity and you're still able to respond without two of your best players having an impact, really, I mean, Dame's having an impact because he's on the floor and you got to double team him and all other guys have to step up, of course. But it just felt like the win was a lot more deserved and real rather than, let's say, Damian Lillard kept his pace up and he scored 70 points in that game. Then you're like, well, do we need Dame to be a superhero every game to win against the Pacers? And now you're just like, no, you don't need that. Um, but going forward, I mean, I expect maybe out of the Pacers, um, I honestly expected a little bit more pick and pop with Tyrese and Miles Turner. He was scaring me a little bit with some of his shots, and I didn't mention Pascal Siakam at all because going back to that Raptors series in 2019, he scares me. He scares me. I actually thought we handled him pretty well if that was the trade that you're making to let him shoot deep twos and whatnot. He was making them, but you know, I'm more scared of what, as I mentioned, Tyrese and Miles Turner picking and popping because I think that opens up a lot. And Turner can shoot, which I think that might raise a problem with Brook Lopez if we're talking about him getting played off the floor because now he can't play in the drop. He's got to be worried about a guy at the top of the key. We've seen that over the years with him in the playoffs. But I thought Brook actually moved pretty well in this one too. But going forward, we're going to have to probably solve that problem because I assume they're going to be going to that quite a bit. But for us, man, I mean, I want to see us do the same stuff, honestly, at least the same stuff in that first half. But maybe I want to see us attack mismatches a little bit more. I thought we could have attacked Tyrese, Doug McDermott. Like, I want to see those guys get eaten up by our players. Otherwise, yeah, I think that does it for me here in game one recap, part one of this episode. Hopefully you didn't get too bothered by just me talking here for 20 minutes, but coming up now in part two of this episode right after this, we'll be right back to normal with Spencer Michaelis joining us, and we'll be giving you our live reactions to game two. Hopefully we're up 2-0. Hopefully I'm in a good mood. I know that we are attending the game together, so that brings a whole other dynamic to our conversations because we're seeing the game live and in person. So as of right now, I'm in a good mood. Bucks are up 1-0, and I feel very optimistic going into game two. But in a couple seconds here, you're going to find out if I am still happy and the Bucks are up 2-0. All right, as promised, we are back here with Spencer for part two, discussing game two. where I'm feeling indeed not the happiest, not as I predicted. We are not up 2-0. The series is now tied 1-1 apiece after the Bucks lost to Indiana at home. Spencer, the audience is aware that we both attended the game last night, so maybe let us know how you're feeling, maybe going into game two, since we didn't get that vibe from you in part one after game one.
I think I probably had less hope than you did going into it. Um, but I was definitely, I mean, when you're going to a game, you obviously are hopeful that they're going to win the game. And in general, I'm hoping the Bucks are going to win every game that I watch or that they play. But without Giannis, it still has always felt like I can't feel confident in the team. I can feel that it's possible that they'll win. And I did think they had a chance to win yesterday's game, pretty much for probably 40 minutes of it. But definitely wouldn't say I was confident for much of it or at any point really even going into it. So I will say before we talk about the game itself and all of that, I thought the crowd was really good yesterday, and it obviously tempered out and it died down at the end when the Bucks kind of fell apart. But it I love a playoff atmosphere. I always forget about it until the next year when I go to a game in the playoffs, but playoff atmosphere for any sport, Brewers, Bucks, anything, it's just so much more electric than going to a regular season game. And it honestly has found me feeling like, man, I don't even enjoy regular season games nearly as much as I used to because I like chasing that feeling of a playoff atmosphere. So
Mm-hmm.
I did enjoy that at the game yesterday. It was fun to be back in one of those.
Yeah, for sure. They threw a funny stat up too in game one. Should mention it, but maybe put some perspective in for us. I think the Celtics have been to the playoffs 10 consecutive years and the Bucks 8, and we're the second most in the NBA. So it feels now we're getting used to playoff basketball, and we're like you said, we're really chasing that feeling. But before we get into our general thoughts, I'll just run through this game quick. Let's try to stop and not rant, so maybe Spencer can have some comments here. But for the first half. Same script pretty much as game one, a lot of Dame to start out with. But we got a new friend to join him with Brooke Lopez. So it was pretty much Brooke and Dame throughout that first quarter. Um, and we even got a lead up to, I want to say 8. It might have been 21-13 around there. Didn't feel really comfortable with that lead, obviously, being that early in general because no one else is helping. But we did get a little bit of a lead. But as I said, we ended up losing that lead because no one else is really helping. And I want to say it was pretty much up until the point of like a AJ and one, and gave us a little bit of life that maybe guys are going to start helping out a little bit. But no, that's kind of where it ended. Still pretty much no one else helping up until that point. But going into half, Dame just like game one, 25 plus points. Brooke probably had 4 threes himself and we'll talk about him more in depth later. But Pascal Siakam, 20 plus points, maybe around 21 points, and you're going into half trailing by 5, so you're still feeling pretty good at that point. Um, and I guess Spencer, this first half wise, I mean, actually, I wanted one more thing. I think Beasley's last stat or last stint in the game, I should say, was he had. I think this happened in the first half. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when he had that transition layup and he didn't go well for him. That was the last time we saw him, but he did get benched eventually in this game. He had maybe one of the worst first halves you could possibly have. Um, Obviously, his quote, it's not going to be pretty for him. I think he meant, or for them, is I think he meant for himself because it wasn't pretty, but horrible defense from him. Had another airball 3 in that sequence before that happened. And then obviously, as I mentioned, that transition layup, which I think Halliburton ended up blocking, and it was just like, get out of this game, and immediately yanked him. But I guess maybe we'll pause there for first half. Did you have any other reactions to the first half? Maybe specific role players that didn't step up that you thought maybe should have?
We'll say Beasley did obviously come back in garbage time, but that was the end of
Yeah.
his
Yep.
legitimate minutes that he got in that game. It really did feel like the Bucks just had to get something out of other players, and I mean Bobby Portis was horrific last night. Just a terrible, terrible performance. Kind of the performance you are always concerned about with him, where every time the Bucks were making a run, he would take a terrible shot and he wasn't making them today. Sometimes he makes the terrible shots and you can live with it because, he is kind of a tough shot maker, so you get it sometimes. But he was not making shots yesterday, so it was getting pretty frustrating to just watch him continue to take those shots over and over and over every time the Bucks were making a run. And we'll talk about it in the second half, especially. He took, I thought, the shot that kind of changed the game. But he was terrible. Jay Crowder's not giving much to the Bucks right now. He's kind of just out there running sprints up and down the court. Um, Obviously, you talked about Beasley. Beasley's been terrible. You just have to get something out of these role players. And you mentioned the AJ Green and one, but I mean, if he's getting minutes, he's got to make some shots. Like he's got to hit a couple open threes. Brook was, I thought Brook had a good game all around, and especially that first half when he was making shots. I don't love that Bobby Portis had more minutes than Brook yesterday. I don't think that was making much sense in general. Um, Pat Bev needs to make some shots. He's got to do something offensively. Pat didn't really make it. I mean, you didn't get anything. You got nothing, like you said, from the bench or from any of the other. It was three players, and even Chris was 15 points. Um, Brook really had a solid game, and like you said, Dame was fantastic in the first half. He didn't even have a bad second half, and we'll talk about that in a second, like you said. But you can't really ask for more than you're getting from Dame so far, even though you would love, obviously, if he could somehow replicate the first half and the second half of these games. That'd be incredible. That would probably give us a chance to win this game, but you can't expect that from anybody. That's unfair to expect that. 35 and 34 points in the first two games on solid shooting splits in both of them. Like, I'm not going to complain at all about what we're getting from Dame so far. He's been fantastic. He's giving the Bucks a chance to win if anybody else will step up, and Brook did his best. And I will say, first half injury scare for Chris Middleton. It was more than anything very good to see him
Hmm.
back on the court, and he looked just fine in the second half. In fact, he played pretty well in the second half. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are the first half takeaways, really. It was that we got nothing out of anybody but Brook and Dame. Chris injury scare and then coming back was probably, honestly, the most important thing that happened in this game was him coming back and looking normal after that, because that was pretty concerning
Yeah.
considering, the whole Giannis situation at the moment. Cannot afford to lose Dame or Chris at all until preferably ever, but especially until Giannis is back. And yeah, I mean, you got to get more out of the role players. You got to get something out of the role players more than anything. So, yeah, that's all I got for the first half. But we can kind of look at what happened in the second half, and I believe it was a 5 point game at halftime. Is that what
Yep.
it ended up being? Yeah, 5 points at half, and then third quarter was kind of back and forth for the most part. It just kind of felt like the Bucks were getting within 4, 5, and the Pacers would push it back to 10, and they obviously finished the quarter up 9. But you, I guess before we talk about how the fourth quarter started and then went wrong, did you have anything in that third quarter that stood out to you at all?
No, I mean they pushed it up to like you said around 9-ish for a couple times, so it felt like it could have got away from us, and you're still able to hang on. Highlighted probably by a little bit of a stretch where it was Dame and Bobby trading baskets and got us down to one. I think it was like 79, 78-ish. Then you end the quarter badly, and then they push it right back up to 9 to go into the fourth. And like you said, leading us into the fourth, I think we gave Dame, was he sitting to end the third quarter? I think he might have
Yeah,
been,
he
which
did for a
is,
minute.
yeah, which led into that stretch of going up by 9 for them. And then you're trying to survive, which I was shocked that we actually didn't have him coming out in the fourth, but we did cut the lead to 4 when he came back in. So you're like, okay, that we had a nice minute and a half or whatever it was stretch. Might not even been that long. It might have been 45 seconds. We had a lot of stoppages, but he comes back in, cut it to 4. And then all she wrote from that point. You got nothing from the offense whatsoever, really. And it was more highlighted by their offense because they were playing just such great team basketball, killing us in every facet of transition offense. I'll talk about it and we can blend it in, I guess, now with our general thoughts in the game because, like we said, that's pretty much the end of the game at that point. But Doc highlighted how a lot of our team offense and our shot quality and the shots that we're taking does play into our defense, which maybe in a general statement, you're probably like, how does that make any sense? Well, if you're putting up really bad shots and you're out of position and quick clock shots or whatever the case may be, that's just leaning right into their transition, and then we're not back on defense, and then they score. So, um, I noticed maybe in I guess now we can really talk about the general stuff. But defensively, um, I mentioned in the first part, I know you probably haven't listened to it yet, but I expected their shots, and I know talking with you in the game that we did really expect their shots to start falling. And I mentioned in game one how they missed a lot of wide open shots themselves, and that could have been played into nerves. I mentioned a lot of their core obviously is young, so you just expected a lot of those shots to go in because they were wide open looks, and they did not miss any today. Same as game one, Pascal. I think that's probably the biggest problem we got to solve right now. Um, is Pascal Siakam and how you want to maintain him a little bit better because I feel like the script, and I mentioned this also in part one, where if he's shooting deep twos and whatnot, and he's getting to his shots like that, and it's taking a while for him to get to his shots, and it's a one man show, I'm totally fine with that. But when they're playing within the offense and he's getting quick looks and he's cutting and everyone's passing and he's just really smoking us in every facet, that's when it becomes a problem. Because now he's just another weapon out there rather than just one guy trying to beat us. And I think we've thrown a couple different looks at him. I know a lot of people, and I've seen it on Twitter, of highlighting Brooke specifically on him and posting his a couple highlights where Brooke doesn't put a hand up because he's too late to recover on a 3-pointer in the corner from Pascal. What I've noticed in these games, the first two games, is maybe Brooks' first step laterally is what's beating him with Pascal. If he does get him one on one, but um, I mentioned with Brooke, I guess I expected more pick and rolls with Tyrese and Miles Turner, and I thought maybe Brooke, if there's going to be a chance for him to get played off the floor, quote unquote, I thought maybe if that gets really out of hand, because that's what we've seen in years past with bigs who can shoot. It's hard for Brooke to recover because now you can't play in the drop fully. You got to recover and go out to the 3-point arc, which isn't fully his fault, but he's just not very fast, unfortunately. So maybe you want a more athletic guy out there, but if the trade-off is Bobby Portis, I don't know if I really want to make that trade either. So there's not really a good answer without Giannis. But maybe we'll stop there. How would you guard or just talk about defense in general, but start first with Pascal Siakam. Maybe how would you handle him a little bit better if you think that we even need to handle him better?
I honestly think without Giannis that they're doing what they should be doing defensively, and that's I would put Brook on him too. He's capable of making jumpers for sure, and he can do it, and he did it in game two, obviously. In terms of like, I thought the Bucks handled everything around Brook poorly, which emphasized all the issues that were going on, and you touched on it kind of there. But if you're going to make Pascal beat you, then make Pascal beat you. Don't make him beat you but also help off of your guy to help on Pascal and give other guys open shots. And don't over overplay other stuff if you're trying to kind of feed things into Pascal because now it allows other people to get going and it allows a bunch of other open shots. And like you said, game one, there were plenty of open shots that they just did not hit, and that made a pretty big difference in the Bucks having their big lead. Um, and there's going to have to be some of that, to be honest, without Giannis. There's just going to have to be. You're going to have to get them to miss some shots and hope that they miss some open shots. They're going to get open shots. It's going to happen. The thing that bothers me is how many paint points they scored and how easily they're scoring at the rim. And to me, that's where if the plan is to make Pascal shoot, then you got to let Brook make him shoot. Don't start telling him to get up on him because, like you said, laterally, he cannot hang with Pascal when he's up, like pressed up against him. He just can't do it. And that's when other people have to help because he's going to get blown by. And that's when the better 3-point shooters are going to get wide open shots. And, or Pascal's going to get to the hoop and finish where he's a very, very good finisher. I think you have to have Brook kind of giving him that little bit of space to get the jumper off, to get the shot off. And you got to live with the results on that. And then you got to hug up against all the other players and make them unable to beat you. And it's in a way, it's like the lesser version on both sides of the coin, the lesser version of the KD PJ Tucker matchup in that Nets series where it was like, all right, KD is going to have to score 55 every game to beat us. And he damn near did because he was that good. But without Giannis, I think you have to make somebody that guy. And I think Pascal's less dangerous as a shooter than a guy like Halliburton is because that's the other guy you would be doing it with. You would be saying, Hallie, you got to go beat us off the dribble and with your shot constantly. And when you involve him in pick and rolls and stuff, I think that's harder to cover than a one-on-one Pascal Siakam over the course of an entire game. Now, what I would say is I would love to see, and we're not going to see it, but I would love to see Ajax get a few minutes for spurts against Pascal. And I don't think strength wise he's totally up to snuff in terms of what you would want on Pascal. And I think Pascal would probably be able to bully him a little bit. But if it's only for short spurts, he's able to just put all of his energy into doing it and just try to slow him down. And again, I wouldn't help off of other people. I would say Ajax, your goal is to stay in front of him the whole time and make him beat you. And they weren't really screening for Pascal. Like he was just kind of dribbling out there and beating people off the dribble. And Ajax's problem right now is screen navigation. He can move his feet laterally. It's just getting through screens where he gets in trouble. So I think he could do it. Like I said, I don't think there's much of a chance we see it. But I would try it in spurts and see what happens and give it a chance at least. And then that might allow Brook to kind of do his own thing where he is roaming a little bit more. He's able to protect the paint a little bit more because in game one, he was able to do that while the Pacers missed some of those shots. But yesterday, he was pulled away from the rim a lot more. And I don't even know, I think he had one block yesterday, probably that I can remember off the top of my head. I don't have the
Yeah,
box
I
score up
remember
right
the
now, but
block
I
you're
think it
probably
was only
thinking of.
one.
One big
Um,
block, I know that because we're probably thinking of the same one, but
he had two, it looks like. So,
okay.
and no fouls, which honestly, that's not a great sign for a guy who protects the rim. You'd almost want to see a foul or two in terms of that just means he's contesting a lot of shots if he's got a couple fouls. Like he's
Mhm.
constantly in there ready to try and deter them from scoring at the rim. And Pacers had no issues with that yesterday. It wasn't great in game one, but it was much, much worse in game two. So that's where I'm at. I think honestly, if you break down all those issues, it's not an excuse or really it's the truth. Almost everything is solved by Giannis, and the Bucks just have to tread water while they don't have him. Game two, they weren't able to do it. And like I said, the Pacers shot much better. They were 45% from three. It's not like that's a true outlier game. I think they're capable of shooting like that. So we could see that happen again. But I think it's really important that if the Bucks don't have Giannis, I, I don't care if they lose one in Indiana, you got to go get one of them. You could lose by 50 in one game, but if you sneak out some ugly win in the other one, coming back 2-2 and potentially getting Giannis back then, like you're in a pretty good spot, I think, because I do think Giannis completely flips this series. Um, the Bucks are capable without him. I just don't. Like I said right at the beginning of this, I just don't have confidence when you don't have Giannis. If we do have Giannis, I would say I have quite a bit of confidence that they're capable of beating this team and can and probably should in the end. But yeah, I'm sure I just took a bunch of your stuff, Gunner. But what were your second half thoughts?
Um, I'll stick to the Giannis point because I was actually going to ask you that question at the very end of how much does Giannis actually solve, or are we just kidding ourselves here and actually believing in this team when we shouldn't, maybe because we've seen so many reasons why we shouldn't. But I think specifically on defense, he would handle a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with right now. I don't think rebounding is. It seems almost like we get in bad spurts rebounding because you look at the final box score. It's not like we got killed in the boards, maybe by like five or something. But it just seems like we get in these bad stretches where we get. Again, I mentioned those shot qualities earlier on, where we just put ourselves in such bad positions, and they get in rhythms where we just get in these sections where it seems so bad, but it actually ends up not being that horrible. But as far as you look at a box score, the one spot where they did just smoke us in was assists. And I think by the blind eye test, that's the most obvious thing ever because they play such great team defense. And I guess my only other critique for defensively is we play this zone, which I think is maybe a good way to handle it against the Pacers team because you're trying to you're trying to get in passing lanes, you're trying to make that not happen where you can let them move the ball a lot. But I think the problem with we saw a difference of game one to game two is it felt like a lot more lazier of a zone where this is more player specific, but you mentioned how we got a lot of Bobby Portis. Um, maybe as lazy as you can be in those spots, he's playing almost a free safety in some of those positions, which what Giannis does and what he does really good at. But Bobby Portis cannot do that. So I think and to mention Bobby Portis again on defense, his blitzing on at the top of the key is mentioned laziness. I cannot stand it anymore. I cannot stand. I actually wouldn't mind it if it's like a safer blitz, but he almost just sells out completely where he's no longer involved anymore. So now it's 5-on-4 because of how fast they move, and then you're at a complete disadvantage already, which we talked about it at the game. It reminds me a lot of Jason Kidd's defense, and it's not even that bad, but we blitzed a lot in those games. And then if you're playing makeup ball against the Pacers where they're moving it so good, you're not going to have a chance. Um, but yeah, I think my only other point is maybe to handle Pascal. I would say with your Ajax point, I would love to see Ajax out there too. I mentioned his strength. I don't know if he can handle him, but you got to try something else. And with that zone, I think Ajax could probably handle that better than maybe a Bobby in spurts or something like that. He could probably blitz even a little bit better the way he can recover. I would just like to see something different in that aspect. But I can see you're you're rearing up and maybe crap on Bobby here. Do you have a comment on Bobby?
I'm always ready to crap on Bobby, but no, the blitzing, like you said, if it's an athletic big, Bobby's not like a terrible athlete. I shouldn't make it sound like that, but he's slow, and especially on the defensive end, he plays slow. I don't know if it's a processing thing because he's even slower than I think he's athletically. He moves even slower on defense than he should. Um, but when he gets into the blitz, like once in a while, if he's in the right spot, he'll come up with a steal and he has a decent amount, and I feel like it's almost led Doc to believe that this works a lot more than it does, and it doesn't work. It's not a good plan. Like you said, not only does he go sell out for it, but he's too slow to recover at all. So it literally is, if you want to say 5-on-4 or 4-on-3, once the guy makes the pass, usually it's the point guard making the pass to somebody else, and now those four are playing 4-on-3 against the rest of the defense. I can't even There were so many threes yesterday that felt like they came off of that. And they actually missed some of them in the first half, and then they made them in the second half more often, it felt like. But I was pretty surprised to look at the plus minus and see that Bobby was one of our better ones at only -5. Um, AJ Green was +7 again, which is funny because it just feels like every time he's on the court, things go pretty well. And he didn't really, he was 0 for 1 from 3 in 15 minutes. Like AJ Green needs to shoot more than 1 3 in 15 minutes of game time. That's a waste of his ability to potentially change the game offensively at times. But Bobby, I guess we played okay. I mean, Brooke was -8, so again, it was those two were mostly fine, both of them in terms of what was going on. Um, Jay Crowder being -21 in 15 minutes is not surprising in the slightest. He was terrible. It sucks, dude. Like giving up 5 second round picks for Jay Crowder is a terrible deal, and it really killed our draft capital. It would have been pretty nice to have 5 draft picks at this year's trade deadline. It feels like that would have swung the table a little bit in terms of what we could potentially get in a trade, and he just has not been worth it at all. The playoff, he was supposedly a 16-game player, and he had been for most of his career. He's not looking like that at all. I mean, the shot looks bad. Um, he couldn't guard anybody. I mean, he's just old. He's over the hill, it feels like, and it sucks that we got him at that point. But Dame and Bev are surprising because Dame was -24. And I mean, obviously, we talked about in the fourth quarter, the run happened when Dame came back into the game. Pat Bev was -27. Plus minus is not everything, but you could tell that when Bev was on the court yesterday, it really just was not going well. And I still think Pat Bev is a playoff performer that I want on the court. Um, but those two together it was just a struggle yesterday. And I think part of it was that they were running the press. They were taking the ball away from Dame for a good chunk of it. And Pat Bev would bring it up and take a while to get it in the offense and take a while to do anything. And then it would end up in a Bobby post up, and Bobby would dribble, and Bobby would shoot a hook shot from the free throw line. And Spencer would be really mad and yell something profane at Bobby from the upper deck. And that was pretty much the cycle we went on for a stretch there. But I was kind of surprised to see that the team actually did okay with Bobby on the court. I would not have guessed that. Um, it must have been offensively driven because it felt like the defense it just felt like the defense fell apart every time Bobby was on the court. So I don't know. Maybe I'm getting tricked by my eyes and that the blitzing's actually working a little better than I think it is. But when it doesn't work, it sure looks terrible. I can tell you that. Like maybe I'm not recognizing how often it works, but when it goes bad, it goes really, really bad, and they get a wide open shot pretty much anytime they want it. And like Gunnar said, that really reminds me of the kid defense in a lot of ways where, yeah, they created more turnovers than the Bud Bucks did, but they also did not cover up anything. They didn't cover up the rim. They didn't cover up the corner three. It was pretty much a free for all unless you got the turnover. So, um, yeah, I don't know. It was frustrating to watch. I, all right, look, before we, I guess, do you have anything maybe that made you hopeful from this game that, or that made maybe a positive that you enjoyed from this game other than Dame? We're not counting Dame because obviously it's been very nice to see him score like he has the first two games. But anybody else that really made you think, okay, maybe they will be able to help us in this run here?
Well, you just threw me for a loop. I was going to be crapping on them again here in a second, but the positive is hoping that Giannis comes back. And I don't mean that if he doesn't come back, and I'll ask you this question again at the end of my little rant here again, but I think we still are hopeful that we can win a game, which I guess maybe is the positive spin. Um, I want to see some of these role players with Giannis. Maybe that would make them be a little bit more productive. I know maybe that's another cop out, but they're not used to having all these guys. Um, Bev, you mentioned Portis, Crowder. I mean, Portis should be able to score by himself, but Crowder, Connaughton, Beasley, Green, they were combined 0 of 9 from three, which bad. You didn't make one of those threes. Not one of you guys made a three-pointer, but nine even seems light. That's six players with 9 3-point attempts. Um, and I've been talking about, and that's including Bobby Portis, who should be shooting. I think he only shot two of those. So five guys shot seven of them. So I think they're all not used to scoring on their own or even trying to attempt to score, which is something I brought up a million times this season throughout the year, which it's fine with Giannis because they're so used to shooting the open shot. But I think we just need to move the ball and shoot open shots and hopefully that they fall a little bit more. Um, but I guess we can end with the positive. My spin well, I guess I'll say this too with Dame. I don't want to mention Dame in a bad light, but do you think he had another slower second half and he's had these humongous first halves? He needs to maybe involve himself a little bit more in the second half. And I don't mean that really in scoring wise, but I don't know if it's a pacing thing for him. We haven't seen this eruption in the first half, and then him kind of just accepting the fact that he's getting face guarded and double teamed. That's awful. That sucks. I understand it, especially when you're already tired and you just gave everything you got in the first half. But I think he does need to involve himself more. And again, I don't mean that in scoring wise. I just mean get your hands on the ball, draw attention, and then that'll create more open shots for other guys, and that maybe will be more inviting to shoot those shots for them. But do you think there's anything to, before we jump to the honest part to end it with, do you think there's anything to Dame's first half versus second half? And do you think he needs to change anything?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he needs to demand the ball whether he's being face guarded or not. It's one thing to have off ball gravity, and I think that's what he's trying to play into is he's trying to create this, well, okay, everybody else should have a lot more space right now because I've got at least one guy in my face the entire time. Like this should create space on its own. And if Giannis was here, that's fine. It really is. It's a lot different with Giannis here because Giannis can take advantage. That's just an open court of 4-on-4 for Giannis. And with that much space, extra space with one less defender even in the picture, he's going to take advantage of that. You can see Chris do it at times, and Chris had, like I said, a better second half. He had an okay game. It wasn't a great Chris game, but it wasn't anything terrible by any stretch of the imagination. But for Dame, when he touched the ball, it ended in an open shot almost every time in the second half. And unfortunately, most of those shots came from the role players who made none of them. But he got Jay Crowder, two wide open threes that I can remember. He got Green the wide open three, I believe. That he again, they didn't make him. Bobby, not only did he set up at least one of the Bobby misses, but he set up Bobby for like three that Bobby just straight up passed on. And that's the other thing, and you touched on it too, I guess, but like the role players need to shoot the threes when they're open. They might not make them all the time, but you have to be willing to shoot them, or now they just aren't even going to close out hard on you. And that's kind of what happened. It makes it even harder for guys to get into the paint and get to the rim. But in terms of Dame, I really do think it's just a matter of he's trying to play the right way. And we've seen it a lot this season. And it kind of feels like in the second half, he's getting into the same mode he got into where it's like, well, I can't try to do everything all the time. Like I got to involve everyone else. And this should be making it easier for them. But unfortunately, Dame, you're basically in your Blazers situation if you don't have Giannis. Like you still got to be the dude all the time. And there's going to be a stretch of 5 minutes in the third or fourth quarter that Chris is probably going to have a nice stretch where he's going to take 6, 7 shots in that time and hit some of them and kind of take over the game offensively for a little bit. But otherwise, it's got to be you, and you got to keep taking shots. And really sucks that the Bucks blew a 6 of 7 3-point game from Brook Lopez because nobody else could do anything. Like you're probably not getting too many of those in a playoff run. So really, it's just more the same thing we've said all season, but in a different regard. Like Dame, just be you and don't worry about anything else, and don't trust your teammates like too much. There's a level where it's too much trust in your
Yeah.
teammates instead of just being like, all right, I'm the guy. I got to go get it. I got to go make a shot, or I got to go create a wide open shot for somebody else. And he's capable of doing that. Um, I guess the only thing I will say also on that is that I do think there's a level of him being a bit worn out in the second half because of the first half and how much he's put into that first half, both games. And I do think the face guarding and the full court press is kind of doing what the Bucks did to the Suns a few years ago when they just kind of annoyed and eventually wore down Booker and Chris Paul enough to where they would get frustrated and maybe either take a bad shot or just sit there and let somebody else handle the ball for a little bit. And the Bucks can't afford to do that without Giannis. They just can't. It's got to be in Dame's hands or Chris's for those stretches where he's kind of taking over. But it's got to be one of those two. And watching Bev dribble the ball up a lot, and even Malik was bringing it up a decent amount when he was in at the beginning of the game. Like, no, none of that. Those two should not be handling the ball. Bev can do it in stretches, but he shouldn't be doing it for the first 10 minutes of the second half like he was yesterday. Like, you got to find a way to get Dame the ball and get him to initiate the offense. And yeah, it's again, you don't want to ask too much out of him because it's unfair, but he also still does need to go out and be assertive and go get the ball.
Yeah. And I guess we can end off with our other star now, and the one that we've been alluding to a lot is the cloud that's hanging over us. Is Giannis going to play or not? And that was a question that I asked in the first part of this, and he did end up not playing. He was doubtful. Doubtful again in game two, doubtful game one, but there are some rumors that he might be questionable for game three. I don't know how official it is. It was on a couple sites that he was questionable, but I don't think they have a clue right now. But there was a report that he was warming up shooting before this last game and in practice. Not a lot of movement, I don't think, really running wise, but still a little bit of hope if he can come back for game three. We've answered this throughout how much he'll help if he does come back, but I think just to wrap that part up for me, it's the paint defense is going to help out. I don't know how much he'll be able to move or not move. We all know that he's the Wolverine, as we mentioned, where he could be back and it looks no different than he's looked. But I think offensively too, a lot of people signal the defense, but I think offensively, when our offense goes dark like it has been, um, and we do tend to just throw it to Bobby Portis and say, go do something, it probably doesn't end well. Imagine now throwing that to Giannis, and it's probably going to end well half the time. So that's going to kill a lot of those runs. So I think those two biggest things for me with Giannis, I think will help us obviously out a lot. Um, like I said, I think we can win without him if he doesn't play in game three. We should still have a chance. Um, I don't think it's always one on paper too. If we look at history, just because we have Giannis back doesn't mean we're going to win either. We got him back obviously last year, and we felt like, oh yeah, we're okay. It's 1-1. We're going to Miami, and I don't think he played in game three, but he came back game four. Obviously, we don't need to repeat how that happened, but it didn't end well. Game five didn't end well, so it does not mean we're going to win. I think it doesn't mean the most talented team's going to win always. People make adjustments to your adjustments, but I think the fact that they haven't seen him in this series yet is also a little bit different than the Miami series. They were planning for him. And then obviously now you're throwing the curveball at you and saying, here, deal with Giannis. Now you've seen us for 2 games. Now you don't know how to deal with him maybe. So, do you expect him maybe to be back in game three? How worried are you maybe if he's not back that we're not going to be able to pull it out?
I do not expect him back. I'd be pretty shocked if he plays in game three. I'd be kind of shocked if he plays in game four. I'm not expecting him to play in Indiana. Not going to lie. Does not sound to me like he's actually that close. He hasn't been able to really run in practice. Like, if you can't run, you can't play in an NBA game. So frankly, he sounds further away than I would ever be hoping for at this point, and I don't have a ton of confidence we're even going to see him in this series, to be honest with you. But as we've mentioned many, many times, he is not really human when it comes to healing. So that's the one bit of hope I guess I have for him is that he's Giannis, and there is always a chance that he will suddenly be just fine or at least good enough to go out and give us everything he has. But I wouldn't say I feel super confident we'll see him again. I'll go back to what I've always said though, and we can win this series without him. It's just going to take a lot of people stepping up. And so far, I'd say one to two, maybe three guys have, and it's going to take four or five more stepping up and doing more than their normal share in order for the Bucks to be able to win this series still.
Yeah, I don't think Giannis will probably play in game three either, but I
Ooh.
think game three is going to tell us a lot. Because if you think about, I talked about scenarios, we've always talked about scenarios of what it looks like playing with Giannis. If you're down 1-2, I don't see a scenario where he doesn't play in game four. And I always want to lean health for sure. And if it's iffy, I have a tough time seeing him playing or wanting him to play, but I also know him. And if we're down 2-1, I think he's maybe probably going to be thinking of last year and how much that changed if you're down 3-1. We can still win without him in game four if we don't have him. But I really, and if we're up 2-1, and I think then you're very safe with him sitting game four. Now I feel really confident. Like, okay, like you mentioned earlier, if we're 2-2 going back home, that's probably not best case scenario, of course, but I'm feeling pretty good going into game five at least. And that's however many more days rest where he can maybe play in game five too. So I'd be feeling really good. So I think game three is going to be very important. Um, just like I said, game one was important. Now it's a 5 game series. It's kind of like a game one all over again. It's just now on the road, because of how much it's going to tell. But yeah, I think Milwaukee's got their work cut out for them. As Tyrese said, Indiana's crowd is just so much better than ours and so much louder. That's certainly why Rick Carlisle had earbuds in during the game because I'm sure it was so quiet in there that he just wanted him in there for some peace. But um, yeah, I guess on that note, we got our hands full. But Spencer, we will do our random bucks as always. So who do you got?
Well, we got to bring a little good playoff juju to the table here. So I'm gonna go with a guy who hit one of my favorite shots of the I guess the Jason Kidd era, if we're gonna call it that. But Jared Bayless, who obviously in that Bulls series that we all remember and all cherish greatly, um, hit the backdoor layup type play off of a Jared Dudley pass to beat the Bulls. I remember I was at that game, of course. And so was my brother, and we were there. We just were going nuts. The whole crowd, obviously, that made it 3-1. But the crowd was unbelievable for that game. And I remember walking out of the Bradley Center to Bucks and 7 chance the whole time, and Bucks fans were genuinely pretty excited to win a playoff game at that point. And that's where we were not too long ago. Was winning a playoff game against the Bulls felt pretty damn good. And now we're 1-1 against the Pacers without Giannis, without our best player, and feels like we're at rock bottom again. Like it's where we've gotten to, and that's a good thing. Expectations bring this type of, or success brings these types of expectations. But it is funny thinking back to that game, how excited the fans were leaving that arena just to make it 3-1 instead of getting swept. We were going to have a shot in the series. So, um, but Jared Bayless had a really, really good second season for the Bucks. He shot extremely well from three, 44% on like 4.5 attempts a game. That first season, he did not shoot well from three. And I don't really know where the shooting came from. Although if you look back at his career, it was really up and down kind of every season. He was mid 30s, then all of a sudden 40, and then mid 30s, low 30s, high 30s, low 30s, 40s, 40 again. Also, Gunner, I don't know if you've looked at his page recently, but if you had to guess his age when he was a Buck, what would you what would you guess his age was?
I've looked at it a million times, so I know he was like what 27. It did not seem like he was that
Yeah.
young.
Yeah, I would have guessed like 31, 32 going
Oh
into
yeah.
that, going into looking at this. And yep, 26 and 27 years old for his 2 years with us. Um, but yeah, that's my guy, Jared Bayless. I did actually enjoy Jared Bayless. I he did exactly what you would want from a backup point guard. And if he was called upon to score more, he could do that. He handled the ball. He didn't turn it over too often. Solid, solid player. Kind of crazy that he's out of the league only 3 years later at 30 years old. And I mean, he did okay whenever he got a chance too, which is what's weird. I've always been surprised that his career ended as quickly as it did. But yeah, that's my guy. So Gunnar, what do you got?
I do have a Jared Bayless story with that exact moment. I think that game was that during school or right after school or something in high school? It was I feel like it was right after we had school. Maybe I don't know, but you said you went, so maybe not. It might have been a weekend, but I remember watching some of it or on my phone or whatever it was, but we were losing. It was tied. Like you said, we're down 3-0. So me and my friends always went to the field and practiced baseball, of course, whatever, if I was a baseball player. But I wanted to know what was happening at the end of the game still, so I had my friend blast it in his car on his radio while we were in BP or whatever we were doing. And they played it over the radio, obviously, the moment, and I just went sprinting into center field and I was legitimately crying when it happened. I don't know why I was so excited. But that, again, you talked about expectations and how much that meant to us. One win down 3-0. Um, I was in tears because of that. So I remember that moment very vividly. And then yeah, along those lines though, in the unfortunate Jason Kidd era, um, me and you shared this moment in the arena. Jason Terry is who I picked, and I remember him specifically. As I said, we shared this moment because we were in the arena for this playoff game. We were down by 30 to the Raptors, I want to say in game six.
Yep.
Um, or was this 2017, maybe around there?
Yeah.
Um, we had, like I said, we're down 30. We made this huge comeback. He had a couple of big threes, but one of the loudest crowd pops, I think is what they call it on Twitter, was when he hit the three to make us go up by one. I think it was like 79-78 or whatever it was. It was a super low scoring game because we just locked in on defense and came all the way back. But I will never forget that shot. I'll never forget Chris's and one shot because it was so loud in there that we couldn't even hear the whistle. We had no idea what happened
No
outside of
clue.
the crowd going nuts. Um, and I remember that game too. This is infamously when Spencer started to eat his rally towel because he was so nervous during the comeback. I think we might have alluded to him eating rally towels during this podcast, but
Yep.
now that's the
That's why they
origin
give out
story to that.
shirts now because I don't eat those.
Yes. And that's why he didn't go to game one because they had a rally towel
Yep.
for that. So,
Can't
um,
control myself.
yeah, but same along the same lines as Jared Bayless. I mean, Jason Terry had a really good career too, obviously. I know Spencer was a big fan of him growing up. I wasn't as big of a fan, but I remember his finals runs with the Mavs. One against the Heat. I was a big D Wade fan growing up, so that was '06. And then obviously he beat the Heat again later on against LeBron. But um, yeah, his long socks I remember growing up. I remember that was funny to me when he would wear those, but he had a great career. I was honestly still even a little bit starstruck that he was on the Bucks because he was like this big figure that I saw in the finals and all these runs, and I just wanted us to be there. And now we got the 38-year-old version of Jason Terry, but he had a couple good moments with us too. So I think just his last season was a little bit shaky, but even for his age and everything, he just shouldn't have been playing that much. And I remember Jason Kidd still insisting to play him 20 plus minutes when it's not even
Right.
his fault. He shouldn't be out there. But I did appreciate him for the most part, but not as much as maybe Spencer appreciated him.
I was a big jet. You mentioned the high socks. I 100% wore high socks in basketball for a while because of Jason Terry, which I'm not proud to admit that. That's not my proudest moment as a basketball player, but I did do it, and it was because of Jason Terry. I loved that Mavs team that beat the Heat. Like I
Mhm.
loved that team. That was really fun. I was a huge Dirk fan and stuff growing up, so um, Jason Terry was always a guy that I appreciated quite a bit. And like you said, definitely was exciting to have him on the Bucks. And the first season went really well. Like he played quite well and he shot well the whole time he was with the Bucks. But like you said, Jason Kidd treated it like it was 30-year-old Jason Terry out there. And Jason Terry did not have the stamina or ability to run around for 20 minutes a game by the time he was 40 years old. And that was not his fault. That was just a very dumb coach doing his thing. But I, that shot genuinely is like that game, even though the Bucks lost, is genuinely one of my favorite Bucks memories. And I kind of forget they lost the game sometimes because
Mhm.
that comeback was so fun. And speaking of Jason Kidd, he got a technical at a terrible time to get a technical during that comeback. So thank you, Jason, for making the comeback even more difficult. But no, that Terry shot, I go back and watch the YouTube clips of that game sometimes just to hear the crowd reaction to that because it's unbelievable. Like I mentioned the playoff atmosphere, and I do think it was really good in game two. Um, but Bradley Center playoff atmosphere when tickets were like $15, that was your prime playoff atmosphere because it was just guys. Again, this was not a popular team to root for at this time. Like it wasn't. It was getting more popular because of Giannis, but it was still not. Like I got crap for loving the Bucks when I was in high school, towards the end of high school. Even when we got to college, people were like, "Really, Bucks fan? Like Giannis is cool, but really?" Um, so I mean, those were all true, genuine, like these people ride and die with the Bucks fans. And think about how many people were still there. They, like you said, they were down 30. I feel like these days there's a good chance a good chunk of the crowd would have just left.
Yeah, true.
And they were down 30, and we were just like, all right, we're gonna stick around and applaud them for a good season. Like that's what a lot of people were thinking at that point. And then we witnessed an insane comeback and almost a great win. And honestly, I think they probably win game seven if you make that comeback. I don't know how the Raptors recover from that. So I guess a little bit of regret on that one because that would have been awesome to win that series. But no, that Terry shot is it's genuinely one of my favorite Bucks memories. And it's weird that it came in a loss, but it's just I get chills when I hear the crowd on that. Like that was really, really cool to witness in person and to be part of. I smacked my shin on the chair in front of me when it happened. Hurt pretty bad, but again, we go through pain for the teams that we love. I fought through it. I did bite through a towel, and I yeah, there were holes in it, and then I ripped the towel after we lost. But otherwise, it's a good memory for me. So, yeah, that's all the time we have for talking towels. That's our new name for the podcast. And no, if you are still listening to us and you haven't lost your mind like I am currently doing, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you are listening on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. Please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Go Bucks.